Well, welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to sharing more about long haul COVID. And I've got founder and CEO, Dr. Stephen Daniel here with Quantum Techniques. And I'm Jody Colegrove, and I've been a quantum techniques practitioner for 16 years. And our goal is to bring healing to chaos. And sometimes our lives feel like chaos. And if we can have our health, then we've got the world by the tail. So that's why it's really important to have our health, because it makes us be able to handle the other things a lot better. So we wanted to discuss long haul COVID, and specifically this time about histamine and what is happening in the body when we have these symptoms that we don't quite understand, or they seem very odd. And a lot of people are talking about that. I've heard a statistic that only 17% of the country has that, but from the people I talk to, there's quite a few people. So I'm a little skewed. Stephen has had people he's talked to. And so a lot of times when you experience it, you want to get to it. And sometimes it can be so minute that you don't realize it's a symptom. And so it's important to just always be in tune with your body so you know what's going on and what it's trying to communicate to you. And that's one reason why I love QT so much, because you do have a way of communicating, understanding, through muscle testing to find out what's going on. We do try to be a little bit of not asking some of the key questions that will give us in trouble and maybe shut down. And so do be conscious of that. And there may be things that we don't go into full depth about because of that reason, but we can certainly cover it with you if you have questions, emails. And so you're welcome to send me an email at jody@quantumtechniques.com. And also I've been kind of doing 15-minute teas with people. So if they do have questions, I can, just kind of hop on real quick and answer some of your questions if they're more in depth to help you get some understanding of kind of maybe what we said or what we're talking about. All right. So just a little bit of background. In August, Steve and I did an original long haul COVID that really talked about discussing the symptoms or what was happening with long haul COVID and what people were experiencing and kind of our ideas of what was going on. Then in September, I did more of a Zoom by myself to explain some of the symptoms that people are having so they could see, hey, I'm not the only one experiencing this. And I think that's really important, that we want to make you realize that you're not alone in this and that there's people that are having these symptoms, and we want you to be able to find answers. And so today what we're doing is we are discussing long haul COVID and how histamine and how our body reacts, and that spike protein and things that we've learned about messaging frequencies and mast cell activation and ultimately chronic illness. So Steve, what have you learned?
A lot more than I ever wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. But it's all fun. Like you said, you'll never be bored.
Yeah, I do remember, when I first learned remote muscle testing with Dr. Callahan, and he said, wow, you got it in 15 minutes. Well, I paid him $100,000, which is a lot. We teach that and a whole lot more on Truth Techniques 1. But when I left it, I said, thank you, because I know I'll never be bored again. Because when you can start dialoguing with the body's intelligence, and what's interesting with all this stuff that I'm looking at, long haul COVID, it's like through our own study and meditation, I was given look at messenger frequency and how that allows, and we talked about this in our last one, hidden pockets of COVID. And I had never heard of messaging frequencies. That came out a month later. Now we're realizing that it's not actually the COVID virus. It's the mast, and when I say mast, histamine, I use those words interchangeably. There are other frequencies besides histamine and the mast cell activation. But it's actually the mast cell storm, the mast cell activation, that becomes an issue with most chronic illnesses. That's what we've learned from COVID. And so when you get a pathogen, it activates mast cells. When you kill it, now whether you do that energetically or you take supplements or a medication, it releases more mast cells. And then when it's dead and circulating the body but can't find its way out, that's what autophagy is. It continues to release more mast cell. until you get it out of the system. And I don't think I know I'd never realized that, but it's not just COVID. That's true with Lyme's. It's true with mold. It's true with a lot of man-made fields, you know, anesthesias, other things. I haven't found it with a lot of other pathogens that weren't man-made, other than mold. I mean, I haven't, like, I've had dengue fever. I didn't have any issues with long-haul dengue fever, so to speak. And, you know, that's a pretty nasty virus. Other things like people who've had bad strep, in general, I have not found that. With the herpes viruses, I haven't typically found that same syndrome. And again, there's a lot of, you know, belief and evidence that COVID and Lyme's were man-made. And so I don't know if that's the component. I don't know that. One of the questions I had early on was, if you clear the mast cell activation, does that include the spike proteins? And so I think it does, especially, you know, one of the things that we've come up with was a new autophagy scan. And I don't know that I'm pronouncing that word right, but that's how I pronounce it. Autophagy is another way I've heard it pronounced. But that's really the body's ability to get rid of dead debris. Now, what I've found across the board is if you have a chronic illness like an autoimmune disease, then your autophagy, I'm just going to call it that way, is not a 10 of 10. It may be a 4 of 10. But across the board, the people I've worked with, now, of course, if you don't have a health issue, you don't call me. But the people I've worked with, whatever their autophagy was before they got COVID or the vaccine, it dropped at least 50%. So if their ability to get rid of toxins and the dead debris, clean it out, was a 6 of 10, you know, after they've had Omicron or any COVID variant or had a vaccine, it drops to a 2 or 3. The other thing that I've been looking at with this is apoptosis. Apoptosis is the proper timing of cell death. And again, I've seen that drop dramatically. What's interesting is, you know, cancer cells are cells that didn't die when they're supposed to. So as I've been looking at how I'm addressing the mast cell activation, and I've recently had 4 new pretty advanced cancer patients, which all coming in within a month. And that's pretty unusual. And every one of them had an autophagy of 1 of 10 and apoptosis of 1 of 10. And these are fairly advanced, like a lymphatic cancer, one of them is lung cancer, one of them is stage 3 or 4 renal cancer with metastases to the bone, various things. And we won't know the long-term effects. And some of them are doing immunotherapy, some of them are doing radiation. But what I'm working on, just like I do with COVID patients or now Lyme's patients, is doing a treatment on the autophagy field, getting the body to be able to see and clean up the dead debris, and doing the same thing with apoptosis. So it'll be interesting to see how does that affect their cancer diagnosis? How does that affect their treatments? You know, again, it's because it's a new scan. We weren't even doing that when we talked in August. So I don't have the long-term results. I know that we're watching the numbers come up. Also very interesting, clearing the autophagy does clear the mast histamine. You know, on myself and other clients, there's some pretty typical symptoms when you clear that aspect. And you would think of them about histamine, like something I don't normally have. When I cleared the autophagy, and for me, the treatment, now I did not space it out. I just kind of do everything on myself once. And if I survive, then I know how to do it the next time for the next person, right? So really didn't have a lot of trouble with the treatment. It cleared in a day. But then my body started releasing old, dead bacteria. And it's gotten less, but that's gone on for 3 weeks. Well, when it first started releasing that, it was like, you know, itching in the left eye, like I had bad allergies, the skin around the eye, itching on a shoulder, things that I don't have, really stiff neck, exhaustion. And it starts helped me to realize that so many of our chronic symptoms that we used to think about as maybe being steroid driven or endorphin driven are actually histamine driven. And, because of my background in psychopharmacology and my own life experience with chronic pain and things, if I had those symptoms and I would test, like, would an opiate work? Would that be any effective? I haven't had an opiate in 20 plus years, but I want to know, what's the mechanism? No, that wouldn't be helpful. What about a muscle relaxer? Nope, that wouldn't be helpful. What about an anti-inflammatory? Nope, that wouldn't be helpful. The only thing that I found helpful was baby aspirin, which that's my main painkiller, baby aspirin and a little caffeine. And what's interesting is in an article that Heidi sent us today, one of their recommendations is baby aspirin. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure why over other anti-inflammatories. So as we're learning that, I'm seeing a lot of people, when you have long haul COVID, and again, whether it's from the shot or whether it's just you've had COVID, like the research today, they're pretty similar scenarios. You've had exposure to that virus. And I'm seeing more cognitive exhaustion symptoms than I am, like I've seen a few people with long-term post-cough, but I've seen a lot of people with emotional things that are caused, anxiety, depression, brain fog, memory issues, cognitive issues. I've struggled with the cognitive and exhaustion issues, and not migraines, but just exhaustion headaches. And for me, like a lot of people, I had long haul COVID for a week early January, or I had Omicron in January. I didn't develop any long haul symptoms until mid-April. And actually dealing with the long haul was worse than I had a mild case of Omicron, scratchy throat, cough, a little bit of headache, fatigue for a couple of weeks. But so a lot of people, the long haul is more significant. And the question we don't, at least the research says, the more times you are exposed to COVID. Now, I don't know how that pans out with vaccine, boosters and all that, but if you've had COVID repeatedly, your incidence of long haul goes up, which would make sense. You're getting hit with that same mast cell activation, and we talked about this, I think we talked about this last time, is that, prior to COVID, they were saying the number one thing that drives mast cell activation is mold exposure. And then they said COVID. Now, give that 6 months in the research. From now, they may say, well, the number one thing that we're finding driving mast cell is COVID, even more so than mold. I don't know that. We just don't have that answer yet.
So they've actually said that mold was a continuing or a underlying cause of COVID?
No, they're saying mold exposure, like living in a moldy house, like I did in graduate school. That's the number one thing that causes people to have mast cell dysfunction.
Got it.
From the data they had a few months ago, the number two exposure is COVID.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I noticed that, a lot of people that were healthy and then got COVID, when they said, well, I didn't have any underlying condition, it was usually mold is what I found when I tested people. And that was like what was, and doctors don't know how to diagnose that there's a mold field, because they don't ask where do you live, what are your conditions, and so it's not something they usually look at.
Well, and the whole thing we're seeing with mast cell activation, whether that's COVID or other things, whatever problems you had before you got COVID, even if they were largely taken care of, it's like throwing a gasoline on a fire. They get exploded. The inflammation, the symptoms get much worse after COVID.
Yeah. All right. So our bodies have this histamine reaction. And so it creates, or COVID creates the body with where they talked about it first, there was this cytokine storm that was happening. And now we're learning that those spike proteins go to different areas of the body, depending on what your pre-existing condition is. So It could be weight gain. It could be your mucosal lining. It could be, you know, brain fog, fatigue. And so just being aware that it's a shape shifter is kind of what I've heard, which I think is an interesting way of saying it. And so it makes you, the person having it, going, well, is it this or is it that, you know, or is there something that I'm coming down with? So I think it's just being aware that your body is dealing with some kind of a histamine response, helps you be a little bit more kinder on the body and knowing how to listen to it. You know, I just had some random person the other day on Facebook, you know, that she's into health, but she's like, yeah, I'm just having some really interesting histamine reactions. I'm like, yep. So it's interesting. We all are kind of noticing it in its own way. And so I really like what you had to say about how autophagy, and if you clear the autophagy, then you clear histamines. And I think that's a really interesting concept. And so I think that's where we've taken quantum techniques and the scans recently to be able to do that. We also want to make sure the body's ready to be able to do that. Is that kind of what you know?
Yeah, what I always do is test for how much the body can do and cut it. If it's somebody that's worked with me, I'll cut it in half. Somebody that's new, I'll cut it by 3/4. The body says, oh, you know, we've got 10 old release bacteria. And like I say, 95% of the time they're dead. The body says, oh, you can do all 10. If I've never worked with you before, I'll do 3. But the thing I'm also finding, and this is, you know, fairly new, is saying, okay, so I've got 3 bacteria, let's say coming out of the autophagy scan that we're going to clear. How many mast histamine frequencies are coming off of this 3 bacteria? Because a lot of times that's a different number. So you may have 26, 27 mast histamine frequencies that somehow releasing these bacteria have created. So I find it helpful to clear not just the cause. And again, with autophagy, it's almost always dead pathogens, mostly bacteria. I would find secondly mold, and then viruses. I have seen ongoing clients that I work with them regularly. I'm not seeing any need to clean up mold, and then you do the autophagy scan, and a week later, all of a sudden, the body's dumping old dead mold.
Got it. Okay.
So, not sure what all that means yet, other than I just know that as that autophagy number goes up and you stop releasing, then most of the people, their symptoms of long haul get a lot better.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that we've worked on and talked about, is that we don't want people to detox too quickly, because then they get, you know, reactions in their bodies, and they don't even, especially if we haven't worked for them before, they don't know what it is, and they run and got a steroid shot, and it's like, no, that's not what's happening. And so and I think what's hard is that we need to go slow enough that the body can recover in time and not do too much at one time. Like I said, you're Frankenstein. You got to work on yourself and know how much you should do.
More importantly, they're actually saying it's like when you're bringing on gut killers, or even the things. There was a nice chart in what Heidi sent today, where they're talking about different supplements and various things that you do. You actually want to see what dose can the body tolerate without a mast cell activation from it. Meaning, I'm just going to use an example. Let's say you're using grapefruit seed extract to kill bacteria. Okay, if you take 1 drop and then you're having histamine response, a mast cell activation, and we check, and the body says, next time just dip a toothpick in it. You want to start with your gut killers, and even your other things, like some things they recommend that are medications, like antihistamines. But see, for some of my clients are so sensitive, they can't take them because they're chemically sensitive. Mm-hmm. They can't take them because they cause a mast cell activation. And so I do have a lot of sensitive clients that are taking things literally the end of a toothpick dipped in it. That's all they can handle. or otherwise they're itchy and, histamine storm.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing we've learned. It's like, no, oh, I'm tough. I can, gut this out. That's actually counterproductive.
Got it.
You don't want the body to create a larger histamine storm that it has the ability to detox. That's critical with all the stuff that we're learning, is if we do a treatment and then you're itchy for 2 days while you're clearing it and you're willing to put up with that, it would have been better if we would have done less, whether we put a filter on it or, like I say, the body showed me 10 bacteria, I'm going to only treat 2. Or I'm taking grapefruit seed extract and the body says I can do 5 drops, but I have I have a mast cell activation. I need to drop down to a half a drop and then stay on that dose for 3 or 4 days, then go up slowly. This is one of those things that this is the end to this road is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a gentle walk. And the other thing that there's an accumulation of factors. So let's say I try to have, okay, I know I'm just going to make this up, 1 drop of 3 different supplements every day, and I'm maintaining. And then one day, but wait a minute, I didn't change anything. My histamines are out the wall. Did you get a bite? Okay. Did you, inhale pollens or something man-made? Is it fall? So you inhaled mold. Did you trigger a histamine reaction from other things? Because how reactive you are has to do with your total histamine load at the time.
I think that's really key because that happened to me. I was, I live in Louisiana, and so I get a lot of bites. And so it's like my skin would be kind of inflamed, and I'm not used to having skin issues. And so that surprised me. I ate some meat that had some MSG in it, and it really knocked my system for like 3 days. And I'm not used to that, but we were in the process of clearing that autophagy out of my digestive system, healthy capillary action, lymphatic area. And so that makes sense that I was more sensitive because I was in the process of clearing that. So yeah, and I think that obviously I kind of knew that was happening because I can muscle test, but that's why we need to go so slow, or to be aware of what your body's communicating with you.
That's also part of the value that's why we push that truth technique so much, is if you can test yourself accurately daily on your histamines, on your supplements, so that, because it's going to change from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've also seen during this autophagy, histamine, mast cell activation, I've seen a lot of people have supplements or foods that they've been okay on for a long time go bad, especially supplements. I'm not sure the mechanism of that, but I know I lost almost all my supplements. I don't take that many, but I had to stop taking them because they were activating too much.
Now, I've had some issues with some clients that heard that, and then they stopped taking everything. And then, some of those are good for our immune system. So it's just a matter of testing to find out what they can have, or what is okay and they don't have a reaction to.
Right.
Okay.
And something, again, it may not test as a toxin. So, unless I'm just going to use, again, grapefruit seed extract. A toxin, no. Okay, test it, test fine. What about too much mast cell activation? Oh, that's going to create too much mast cell activation. So I put that one aside for now. And I have had kind of rethinking this as we're in this journey. Someone that they had terrible mold exposure and all kinds of stuff, and they spent their time in the Dallas clinic. And they asked me, they said, and they had a tremendous amount of surgical stuff and anesthesias and bad drug reactions, and then they had phenomenal mold exposure. And they said, do you think all of my reactions at Dallas in the environmental clinic was from mast cell? And I said, no, there's 2 fields. One is you can have toxins, and then you have toxins that create mast cells. Not all toxins create a mast cell activation. Right. And then you have other things besides the toxins that create mast cell. So it's not as simple as it's one or the other, it's both.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and I like the idea, when we test muscle test foods and things like that, we're usually testing against like 7 different fields. It's interesting this may add an 8th field that we tested against, which is testing against mast cell histamine.
Yeah, and that whole activation field.
Mhm.
But I know the way I'm approaching it right now is, we treat COVID, then that messaging scan for hidden COVID. Okay, then look at, is there a mast histamine field we need to clear? And the next step is, and you test for when is the person ready to do it and how much to do, is doing the autophagy scan. And again, if the body says there's, like for me, it was 51 viruses in my first scan. And of course, I just did them all at once. I don't typically do that with most people. The body says, oh, you can do them all. I say, okay, I'm going to do 5. Okay. And then the next day, I just, shoot me an email, let me know how you're doing, and I'll see how much I can do. The next day, I may do 15. And so instead of doing that all at once, and I'm really fast, especially with the internet, 5 or 6 minutes, I can get that to clear. But even once that's clear, then the body starts releasing the dead pathogens. And I don't know how long that's going to last. And I always like to figure out where are these coming from. So if I break up my life, there was childhood in Phoenix. Then I was up until I was 22. Then I lived in LA. Then I lived in Flagstaff. Then I lived in Prescott and then Maui. I want to know, when did these pathogens come in? I find that helpful. And a lot of times when there's a pocket of pathogens, there were some other toxin issues at the time that interfered with the body's ability to see and detox the pathogen load. Like when I was in childhood, a lot of antibiotics and living with aerial spraying and a lot of toxicity in terms of chemicals in the home. Go to LA, lived in black mold. What was going on in Flagstaff? Well, that's when I had mercury poisoning. And so I find that often there's some man-made toxicity that interfered. That's why the body couldn't do its autophagy job back at that time frame. It was pretty tied up, just keeping me alive, dealing with the man-made toxicity. And I don't think you have to test for that. For me, it's just interesting to know.
Yeah. And I think you can also add psychological things to that. I mean, what emotions did you have at that time? Did you have any, big traumas, things like that? Because that can add to how well your body's being able to process all that. Yeah.
Right.
Now, if I go back a little bit, we as practitioners are learning kind of at the same time. So we just appreciate, I'm taking notes as you're talking to and adding to my scan. But so what I understand is that, okay, if you have long haul COVID issues, then you do a normal scan, but you also do the messaging frequencies to find the hidden COVID. Is that what I kind of heard you say?
That's kind of the first step. In other words, I want to make sure that we don't have hidden pockets first.
Okay.
And that usually is pretty simple, fast. It's rare to find hidden pockets a second time. In other words, if you go back, what are the messaging frequencies? Where do they show up? Clear those. You're going to find the hidden pockets of COVID. And those are almost always gone within a day without a healing crisis.
Okay.
Almost always. The next thing I want to look at is, okay, what's our mast histamine activation from this? And sometimes just clearing that. And the next step is the autophagy.
Okay.
Now, I will say in between there, not to get more complex, in between there, I realized there was a deeper level of toxicity. So before I came up with the autophagy scan, I was saying, okay, what's the deeper level of toxicity that's not allowing the body to do its job here? It's what the body can see, it can heal. It can't see something. And so I would clear that. And that also is very helpful to clear slowly. And that's almost always a man-made field. Like old anesthesias come up a lot there. Old antibiotics, old medications. You can test, should you do the toxicity scan next or the autophagy? With a toxicity scan, I was not getting this huge, I'll say, histamine symptom field like I did with autophagy. I got other symptoms, but it wasn't that one. You know, there's a difference between I've got a headache and my neck's so stiff I can't move it, my eyes are itching. Well, that neck stiff, eye itching, that's for me, it's mast cell histamine. And it's been very common when I've talked to people and I said, did you have any of these symptoms? Oh, yeah, I have. Okay, well, that's a histamine response. And I have tested for people because again, you know, would an antihistamine work? Like natural ones, you know, ginger tea, that's a natural histamine. The dark chocolate that's real low sugar, that's a natural antihistamine. Thyme, whether that's tea or fresh, that's an antihistamine. Then you have, you know, the singular, the Claritin, Benadryl, Pepsid. There's a lot of, I can't remember all of them, but and check, would those even be helpful? And again, for some people, they test helpful, for some not. I think, you know, I think the bigger issue, you know, I'm almost 69, so I have a Medicare practitioner, and they're a very nice person. They're studying Reiki, and they're really, really nice nurse practitioner. And I give them a copy of Tooth Techniques 1 because I want to train them, okay? And they were interested, so. But the reality is traditional medicine pretty much has no answers for what we're doing. And they're not interested, you know. It's like, you know, for me, I said, you know, right before COVID, I had a great 2 weeks. You know, I was coming off of latent Lyme's disease and parathyroid issue and cortisol. I had a great 2 weeks. I had more energy and mental clarity in that 2 weeks than I've had in a while. And then I got COVID and I haven't quite got back there. And so it's like, so I'll have a really great day and my diet and exercise don't change, okay? I'm really regimented in terms of exercise and diet. I live alone with my dog. So, I mean, you know, I don't go out to eat, so I don't get toxins. I'll have a great day and the next day is not a good day. And what's the difference? It's whatever my body's releasing that's triggering mast cell activation. I'm not finding anything else. It's not like I'm getting new viruses. So, so again, let's go back and say, I've got these neurological symptoms. I'm not as sharp as I used to be, except for some days I am, okay? I'm having this and this, but not every day. And, you know, for me, my whole life, my things I've struggled with have always been a toxicity issue, whether that's foods, environment, pathogens, it's always been a toxicity issue. And I really think that's probably true for most people. So it's like, just asking her, you know, she goes, well, maybe I'll send you down to Barrows Neurological Institute. So I did email her today and I said, I'm not vaxxed, I'm not going to get vaxxed. Do they even want me there? You know, that's a 2 hour, you know, it's whatever, 2 hour drive, but it's kind of like, I don't have a lot of hope that they're going to do an MRI and find something. I mean, they tried it on me 35 years ago and I had a brain and it was still there. Not it was impaired, but you know, I haven't been able to change that in 35 years. But it was simply the fact that, you know, they're looking for tumors or a lesion or a head injury. And that's not what we're dealing with this one. So I think there's, and the other thing that really hits me, you know, as you go into the medical system, which I really haven't had a lot of experience with in terms of traditional medicine over my life, is you want somebody who will let you lay out all this stuff's going on. Now, is there a convergent point? And, you know, I was referred to an endocrinologist and they said, well, everything's fine. You're perfect. You know, and this is not being racial. A lot of these specialists are Indian and they're much more rigid in staying within the lines of traditional medicine. Okay. I mean, when I tried to bring him some things that were prescribed, but they weren't his field, he said, I don't even look at that. So I just said, you know, from your perspective, because part of this is energy, you know, where else should I look? He goes, I don't have any idea. I don't look at anything outside of what's on my iPad from your blood studies.
Wow.
And again, that's pretty common. So I think, you know, the need for people like what we do to look at that whole field and being willing to listen to all these little things like, oh, and by the way, my shoulder is itching and I'm scratching up bloody at night. What could that, and, you know, endocrinologist doesn't think about histamines or mast cell.
Mhm.
I don't know if a neurologist would. So I think if we're going to be sending people to an endless array of specialists who will not look outside their field and will only look at an iPad, often not even physically examine the patient,
Mhm.
I think traditional medicine is going to have a really hard time putting a great treatment regime together. You know, I'd like to be wrong on that. I'd love to be wrong on that. I'd love to get them, love them to find that special pill that you can take, and then all your long haul COVID goes away. But when I look at long haul COVID as one of many chronic illnesses, and at least in my lifetime, and I've been doing this, you know, full time for 25 years, I've really not found anybody with a chronic issue that goes away with one magic pill or two magic pills. So that's what I'm saying. We've got to share knowledge. We've got to learn. And like we say, a lot of this is lifestyle. We've known that. But even if you have a clean lifestyle, if your mast cell activation is off the chart, you've got to know what steps to take to get it back under control. And that's what, like the nice article Heidi and JJ sent. And I've read a lot of articles and they all kind of point to the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And I do think that, you know, that the particular article that we're referencing was printed in the ECOG Times. And so, you know, it is getting out there in the more of the, you know, not just, you know, Dr. McCullough and places like that, where not that many people have reference to it. So the word is getting out. And I just know, like, the alternative, I wouldn't say he's an alternative doctor, but he's a doctor that my parents have that is more willing to look at a bigger picture. And he, you know, decided he didn't fit with the Mayo Clinic anymore. You know, he's searching. And so, you know, there are doctors out there that really do want to search. I was raised in a church that produced a lot of doctors, but they were very much into the mind, body, spirit. And you need to have all parts of that in order to heal. And I've always been surprised that that's kind of why I went into QT, because it really does have that approach, you know, in looking at what are the toxins, what's going on, you know, but there's also a mind component too. And one of the people we've had on our team, you know, years ago was a doctor, and he said, no, that's not how I experienced medical school. You basically just go and you look at all the symptoms, and then they just attach a pill to the symptom. And then that's what you spend all your time doing, is just lining those up. And it shocked me that that's what medical school was. I just thought it was a lot more.
Well, you know, I think I know I wouldn't be here today without my spiritual journey. And I think for anybody with chronic illness, if you're not working on your spiritual self, and they think, oh, I've got this symptom, my brain's not working, what do you immediately think? And it's going to get worse and last forever. And if you let your imagination run with any chronic issue, it creates 1,000 problems for every one it solves. Versus, you know what? I've been in the weeds before. And like God promises, I've always found a way out. And so, you know, an old crude saying I've said is, sufficient therein is the shit of the day. Okay. I got enough stuff to deal with today. I don't have to, in my imagination, imagine this is going to last forever and get worse and worse every day. And then I'm going to end up in a little post-COVID hump somewhere, right?
Right.
That sense that I will be given the grace today. And I love, I don't know if it's which one of my spiritual mentors I read, but the solution to everything is that I can be present in this moment. The answers will appear and I can learn. Doesn't say how comfortable I'm going to be, but I can learn.
Yeah.
And you know, truth defeats darkness and truth defeats lies every time. And that's why I'm, you know, if somebody says, well, everybody can take this magic drug and get well, that's going to be a lie, because that doesn't happen. But once you find the truth, it's going to help some people. Some people it's not going to help. Some people are probably injured. Okay, that's kind of the way of all medications. You don't have a medication without a side effect. And they have to help some people that wouldn't be doing them. But that sense that I can choose to stay grounded in this present moment in gratitude and know that, and I love something Wayne Dyer said years ago, the answers you seek are already on their way.
Yeah.
So how do I position myself where I have to start out by acknowledging I don't have the answers? Because if I don't start with saying I don't have the answers, then I only accept answers that I already believe in. And if I had the answers, I wouldn't have the problem. So how do we accept the fact that the answers are coming? Is it exactly the time and the way I want it? No, but last time I checked, I wasn't God and I didn't make the planet, right? And I think even within that, there's a divine purpose in when the answers show up. So how do I rest in gratitude and peace with that? That's a huge part of the journey.
And being open to hearing the answer when it comes. That whole idea of being peace, to be still, to know that I can hear the answer when it shows up and be ready for it. Yeah.
And I can remember once a student asking me, well, what if I don't recognize the answer when it comes up? And I said, oh, grasshopper, don't worry about it. It'll keep whacking you up the side of the head again and again and again until you do listen, So my prayer is help me to be smarter and learn the lesson quicker. Just one thump across the head should do it. I shouldn't need 20 or 30. But sometimes I'm like JJ and I need 20 or 30 or 40 and, eventually it gets through.
Oh, well, I just wanted to cover a couple things here before we do the question and answer. So some of the things that we have, kind of to recap, is that we have found that COVID can change epigenetics and your DNA, and that's why we do the messaging frequencies to find out what are we dealing with and how it's been impacted. The second thing is that COVID interferes with your cell surface receptors, ACE2 receptors. That's what the spike proteins are. They're going to those receptors so that the body's taken over and can't receive the information it needs into that cell to do what it needs to do. And so kind of trying to put that in kind of plain language there. A lot of times the ACE2 receptors are in the heart, the brain, the kidneys, and the intestines. So those are areas that we have found issues with people. Just heard on a documentary the other day that when you get the shot, the things that are impacted the most are spleen, liver, and ovaries. And then we have found from our testing that the functioning of the heart and the blood go way down. And so those are things that we look at to try to get those things taken care of. Talked about mast cell activation, which is the histamine response of the body. And didn't really cover it in this one, but just a lot of times that histamine can also look like autoimmunity, because your body doesn't know what to go after, whether it's the substance or the tissue. And so it goes after both. And that's what autoimmunity is. As we mentioned, autophagy is the body taking out the garbage. And it's really important that we do that process first, because if you try to detox, but you've got all this garbage there, you're going to dump more than you need to. And so I think what I heard you say is when we do autophagy first, and then once that's cleared up, then we can do apoptosis, which is the natural cell death, and try to make sure that process is working so it doesn't get backed up.
I want to add one thing to that. When you're clearing, like, let's say the autophagy scan, and then it starts releasing dead pathogens. The majority of time, the only place I'm finding that dead pathogen frequency is, the amygdala for emotional trauma, cerebellum toxicity, cell memory, which is your epigenetics. So that would make sense that's why COVID and things that junk up your autophagy, they're blocking, they are interfering with the epigenetics. And I think that leads to the autoimmune disease process.
Got it. Okay. It's a great clarification. Thank you for that. That helps. So with quantum techniques, these are the kind of things that we are clearing. And so, I've kind of broken it down to a 7-step process, but it takes about 60 minutes. And what we're finding is that we can walk you through that to find out what the body's organs or issues are dealing with, and why it's having a problem. So when you sign up for a session by this coming Friday, Central, at 5 o'clock Central Time, I'm giving $100 discount for doing that treatment with you. And it's important to realize that by Friday, all we're wanting you to do is, if you're wanting to do this and take advantage of this offer, is to fill out the 2 forms. So that's the client session request and also the client history. And they take about 20 minutes to fill out. And you just need to have that done by 5 o'clock on Friday. I'm doing some traveling because like I said, I'm in Arizona. I'm going to be going to Louisiana. And so I can't really quite do a session with you until next week anyway. So it's not like you have to get it done this week. But that's the first step, is to filling out the session request and client history. And I will put a link in the chat here in just a little bit. The things we've talked about in the past is at least you can say, hey, these are my problem areas, and you can reconnect those with the brain engines and the cortical contacts. And I have a video that show that with the charts. And so if that's something you want, you can send me an email at jody@quantumtechniques.com, and we can send that to you. But you can see that just doing that is one part of the full 60 minutes that we usually work on, but it's at least getting your body to wake up and recognize it needs to reconnect because it's been offline and not communicating. So I want to open up for questions and answers. You can raise your hand, you can go off mute. So let me know if anybody has some questions. Looking at the full view here in case we have some questions. We may have baffled them, Steve. Let me, while I'm seeing if someone wants has a question, let me put that link in the, this is harder to do than you would think. So I'll put that link in the,
Hey, Steve.
Yes.
When we were talking before, I think it was last week, we were talking about the mRNA, the vaccines actually altering the DNA, but the actual COVID itself just interferes with it, correct?
I don't know that we have the answers to that. From what they're finding, they're not finding a tremendous amount of difference, like the article that Heidi said. I think you're going to find eventually, when you look at young people having cardiovascular issues,
right?
That had no pre-existing, that's an epigenetic issue. It's changing blood clotting, other factors. So I think they're going to find that both COVID and that's kind of what I was saying before. I haven't seen evidence of things causing that autophagy epigenetics field that were not either black mold. I think that does it. But of all the other pathogens I've worked on, it's been Lyme's, a lot of belief that it's man-made, and COVID. I've not seen it with other pathogens. So we definitely know that, man-made chemicals cause epigenetic damage.
Right.
So I don't know if it's the virus itself, if it's the technology in the virus, if it's because the virus, I'm not talking about vaccines now, I'm talking about the virus itself was man-made and the man-made components of it. I don't think we have that information yet.
Right.
I wish we did.
Yeah.
But I know that there's, at least of course the news, there's a bunch of new COVID variants coming, which we kind of expected that. And that's the natural evolution of viruses. They become much more contagious, meaning they evade the immune system. And whatever vaccines you come up with, they're going to be better than the last group of getting rid of them, but less deadly. They don't kill you because then they can't spread.
Right. Well, a lot of people have actually stopped recommending, like in Florida, the Surgeon General isn't recommending for anybody between 18 and 36 males anyway,
Right.
and not for kids either. So
Right.
at least some people are opening their eyes.
Right. Well, and hopefully, hopefully with some of the changes in our social media platforms that are coming, that we might have access to more truth getting out than everything being so heavily censored. Because we need that truth to get out so people can examine it and look at it and make their own conclusions and argue with it, versus having everything just censored doesn't let truth get out. So that's one of the things that we need to do is unlock dissension about what works and what doesn't work, so we can have an open forum to finding truth.
Yeah, it makes it hard when we, it's hard not to be able to talk. So Rachel has a question. So let's see. Yeah, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, so to test for autophagy and histamine, do you just ask on a scale of 1 to 10?
With well, histamine, you can ask, if you want your histamine levels, let's say, to be a 1 of 10, how high are they? You can just muscle test that, right? And if you check, and I know I keep saying this, but mast histamine, I put those words together. So like if I look at myself, what were my histamine levels before I had Omicron? Well, they used to be real high, but I had them down to a 2. Now, after Omicron, they went up to an 8. Okay. That's helpful to know. And then, working on that, what's the field? How do we clear it? Autophagy, the same thing. If you want it to be a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your autophagy right now? Your ability to get rid of this debris. And then, the way we teach it, you build the field. What are all the things, all the organ glands and tissues that need to communicate to get rid of this autophagy problem? And then what's the toxins, pathogens, emotional fields, what's blocking it from clearing? And then how much should you try to do at one time? Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, and I think it is fascinating that our histamine can be higher after COVID, and it can be higher in certain areas, like digestion or the mucosal lining or the kidneys. And so sometimes, if you ask the overall body, you get one answer, but if you're going to a specific process your body's doing, then like losing weight, it's going to be a different number. And so just to be aware of kind of like what you're testing. Yeah.
And then again, depending on what you're detoxing, or like I say, in your environment, those numbers may go up and down quite a bit.
Mhm.
Like you may get a new virus, and all of a sudden, because your autophagy or histamine issues are already maxed out, then it goes over the top. And bites are pretty common.
Yeah, I just, it really surprised me, Steve, because I get bites a lot, and I usually don't have a problem clearing them, but they were taking longer and longer. And
Right.
I was sitting outside. I had long pants down, so I knew that I didn't get bit, but I started having a itch on my knee, and so I itched it. And by the time I got home, it was bloody. And I'm like, how did I itch myself so much? I never done that in my life, but it was that whole skin field was in, hyper, histamine. And so it was having an issue. So it's interesting how it just shows up in different ways.
Well, and again, where you live, those alligators can bite right through your pants. It's not like this mosquito like we have in Arizona, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. So if anybody has any more questions, we can still answer those. So again, if you're wanting to know how to reconnect the body, finding those key organs, glands, and tissues you're dealing with, and then putting them back online with what kind of Steve talked about, which is the cell memory, the amygdala, and the medulla oblongata and cell memory. Those are all things that reconnect, which is part of the brain engines and the cortical contacts. But that's just a little part of what we start to do to get the body to reconnect itself. When we do a full QT treatment, we're doing all the other things like, well, for your body and what it needs at the time. Because if we do everything, like I said, Steve says, you're gonna overwhelmed. So we have to take it in small bites. But QT is looking at, okay, what are the organs, what are the toxins, what are the pathogens, and seeing where your body needs to clear that. And so, like I said, I'm doing a special where I'm taking a $100 discount if you sign up by 5 o'clock on this coming Friday at Central Time, filling out those 2 requests, which is a session request and the history form. To fill those out, we'll give you $100. I'll give you a $100 discount to set up a session for that, and you don't have to be a new term client. But wanting you to get answers, because our ultimate goal is we want you to get your life back, get clarity, have energy, so you can live in peace and know what's going on. And I think that's something that we're always trying to give answers, and so that you don't just feel like you're kind of a hot mess. It's like, okay, now I'm understanding what my body is dealing with and what it's trying to communicate with me. And so if you do want the QT codes for COVID that we have, if you want the videos and the reconnection charts, or if you want a list of supplements, I put my email in the chat for quantumtechniques.com for Jody. And then I also put the link for filling out the session request in the history form. There's other ways that you can connect with us. So for me, I've got my Facebook group, which is Health Puzzle Academy. And so I'd love you to sign up for that through Facebook, and it gives you more information, kind of keeps you on the road of what we're learning, and health information. And so it's a fun platform to be able to ask questions and hang out with people that really do enjoy taking care of their health. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Jody Colegrove at Quantum Techniques. And I have a lot of information on there of lots of things that Quantum Techniques works on. And it can be as simple as how to, get stains out of clothing that are more naturally, so you're not using a lot of chemicals. But yeah, it's time for you to discover, the cause. What is the root cause of your health issue? What's going on, so you can have clarity and be energized and live in peace and no longer just feel frustrated. So I'd love to work with you. Just want to make sure we've answered all last questions before we leave today. And I just appreciate you guys being here. And it's a fascinating field. We love it. That's why we do it. We just enjoy learning more about how our bodies are handling this time in history. And just fascinating how it works. Steve, did you have any other comments you had here at the end?
Well, other than, we're just learning a lot. In other words, I've had a lot of people that did not have EMF issues until after they had COVID, whatever that additional layer of inflammation is. Like I say, I've had 4 recent cancer patients that were asymptomatic until they got COVID or the vaccine. Now, I'm not saying it caused the cancer, but I think somehow when you look at their apoptosis dropped in half and their autophagy dropped in half or more, that maybe it kicked it into an active phase. We just don't know yet. So we're going to continue to search and study and learn more.
Yeah. I had a friend, I went to lunch with her, and years ago, she always said, oh, I can never wear a watch because I stop the time. It mixes up with my electrical system and my body. And so I'm sitting there at lunch, and she has this thing underneath her shirt. She's, oh, I have a heart monitor for afibrillation. And I said, oh, but you're wearing an Apple Watch. You always told me you couldn't wear watches. She's like, oh, it didn't affect it. It's just like, well, so I texted her later and I said, you might want to think about, either putting some kind of a cell safe on that, or doing something, or take it off, just see if it affects it and you don't have an issue. It's worth knowing. So sometimes you just don't, we get in such a habit of doing certain things, and we don't realize that we've had a shift, that maybe those things we can't do again, or they're impacting us more than we realize. And so I think half of it is just being present, being aware, being still to kind of be aware of what your body's telling you. So I appreciate everybody for showing up today. And I look forward to you being on a Zoom call next month. I don't know what we're doing, but we will let you know. So thanks, everyone. I just appreciate you being here, and let me know if we can work together. I'd love it.
Bye, guys.
You guys have a nice week. Take care.
Bye, everyone.